These are the addictions. These are the vices that men struggle with.
Vice is not just something flippant. This is like the difference between good and evil men, magnanimous men and men who are effeminate.
We have to reframe, as it says in Romans 8, right? We have to put on the mind of Christ, renew our mind, right?
This is humility. It's total self-awareness, which leads to total self-acceptance of ourselves right where we're at.
Once we discuss within ourselves, we have to realize that these are the situations, and we have to then think through, what can I do to avoid these things? Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on another episode of The Catholic Gentleman. We are your hosts. I am John Heinen, and got my friend, Executive Director of Father St. Joseph, the founder of the Father St. Joseph, Devin Schadt. Devin, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm all right. Yeah.
I got a question for you, Devin. Have you ever had a big beard like me?
No, can't do it, man. I mean, I can do it, but it looks pathetic. So, in fact, I was at a distillery last night with my wife on date night, and Nick, he's one of the bartenders, and man, he's had a beard for like 18 years or something like that. And I'm so jealous. It's like down to his chest. And I tell him that every time. I'm like, man, it looks like my lawn when I grow it out, like spotty, you know? And
sure.
Yeah. So I can grow it out a little bit, but once it gets too far, I just look, my wife says I look like a walrus. So yeah, I am the walrus. Woo.
Cuckoo. But you don't get hair plugs or anything, right? Like, I mean, you're not going in that direction. Yeah, exactly. We embrace what we have. I was talking to a gentleman yesterday who had a nice big beard, and it was a big beard. And I was commented on what a nice full beard that is. And he said, you know what? I have a deal with my wife. She likes beards your length or slightly shorter, and I like big beards. And so she gave me permission to grow this out the entire year. But right before Christmas, I have to cut the whole thing off.
Oh, bummer.
And he goes, so we'll see if I get there. And I was like, wait, did you start that in January? Because this is a big beard. And he was like, yeah, about January. I was like, you got it, man. Like,
impressive, man. A lot of testosterone, no Rogaine, right. You know?
No, exactly. No hair plugs. Awesome. Well, again, so glad to be with you, Devin. Glad for our listeners here. We're going to be discussing these 3 bad habits that, left unfocused, left undirected, is going to just bleed into all the other areas of your life. We're going to talk about that today. These are the addictions. These are the vices that men struggle with. And I look forward to dialoguing more about that with you. If you like what we're doing, you want to support the work of the Catholic Gentleman, please head over to Catholic Gentleman Plus, where we have 23 sessions now for men. We're coming out with new episodes, new things of that nature all the time. I'd love to see you in there. Thankful for all the men that are there. All right. So, like I stated, as men, we should be constantly striving to get ahead. We should be constantly working on our virtues. We should be working on living a righteous life, but we don't really know what that means. I could say all of those things when I was in my 20s, but I didn't really know that virtue was just like consistently choosing good, right? Thinking through your actions before you do them, like these sort of things. And you hear your parents say all the time, think before you act, but like that takes a certain degree of maturity to get there. And as I've dove into this ministry here at the Catholic Gentleman, I start realizing not only these vices that men constantly struggle with, the 3 we're going to be talking about here, which are definitely the most prevalent that we get questions about here, but the ripple effects that they have in life. A lot of this has come through experience of my own, through conversations with other guys, through conversations with you, Devin. And I think that we have to know where it bleeds over into our other lives. And then we have to know how to course correct. We have to know how to direct it in a way that we can do incrementally going forward and not just all at once. And so I love talking about this stuff. Excited to dive into it with you, Devin. Love to hear your thoughts just kind of on the groundwork when it comes to vices in general and leaving them unchecked.
Yeah, vice. I think Latin is vituum, which is seriously, it's the equivalent of addiction. So it's a bad habit or disposition that inclines one to sin. So that's what vice is. And I think a good picture for that we can envision is a vice itself. It's a clamp. You get locked in, and that's the devil. He begins small and he works that habit. He appeals to that habit to where we get locked in it. St. Augustine has this great quote. He says, Vice is a quality that makes the soul evil. So vice is not just something flippant. This is like the difference between good and evil men, magnanimous men and men who are effeminate. And I
Yeah.
believe that, and we'll get into this in a minute, that the root cause of vice in general and these is effeminacy.
Yeah. I agree. I appreciate you saying that, because I think the reality is we have to understand that what this effeminacy means. And in fact, just to clarify it, it is the unwillingness to do the harder things, to do the difficult things, due to attachment to pleasure. And I think that that's always the connection here when we're talking about effeminacy, as Thomas stated it, was that basically we're just not willing to do the harder things, to grow in virtue, to be righteous, because we're so attached to the pleasures and the passions of our lives. You know, it's just not an unwillingness to do the harder things because maybe we don't know how to do it, because it seems insurmountable, because we've got so much on our shoulders, something like that. But it's that attachment to our pleasures, that attachment that binds us to these comforts, to these creatures, to these sort of things. And we live in an age, I was going to talk about this later, but I think just right here, we live in this age of addictions. And you're right. So many of these that we're going to bring up here, I frankly didn't realize they were an addiction of mine. Like when you think of addictions, we think of alcoholism, we think of heroin, we think of, some of these sort of things. And sure, those are addictions, pornography addiction, et cetera. But there are other addictions that we're going to talk about right here that are just these bad habits that we consistently go to, like a dog to his vomit constantly. And we don't really realize that depth. Now, when we're talking about our culture that we live in an entertainment junkie culture where we have to be inundated. We have to experience these dopamine hits. That's why videos can no longer be longer than 90 seconds, right? Like, because that's the dopamine rush that we need. And then we have to go on to the next one.
Average watch time on those 90-second videos, like 13 seconds.
Exactly. It's the first 6 seconds, as they say. Brendan Kane, who's a video marketer, says, it's the first 6 seconds hook. Like if you don't get them there, you've lost them. And it's like, oh my goodness, but this is what we're in. And what I found is that entertainment breeds addiction, and addiction breeds depression. And so we have this culture here, and I would even say entertainment to just distractions, right? Entertainment not as some sort of virtuous form of entertainment, just kind of mind-numbing distraction of our times. Yeah, go for it, Devin.
So I would caveat that saying sensualism then breeds that entertainment kind of mentality, or that seeking out the pleasure. So it's sensualism. And that's the key with effeminacy, is that St. Thomas Aquinas says that there's 2 kind of ways that we can be effeminate. And first is when we lack the pleasure, we don't think we can endure it. And therefore we become a little bit saddened by that. And think about Lent. How many people kind of like, oh, they dread it. They start to get kind of inwardly down about it, melancholic a little bit. It's because they don't think that they can go without the pleasure. Okay, so that's the first way Thomas talks about. The second way is when you have a temperament toward the softness. And he uses actually sodomites as the example. Like, and he says that they're more akin to being like women. He says this. So because they're so soft-hearted in a way, is what he says, or at least that's the idea there. So there's a temperament, and then that's one of the ways that we can be effeminate, because just of our natural temperament, but then also by means of the lack of pleasure, which brings on this sort of sadness. And so we have to fight against both. Yeah. Especially in our culture, like you're saying, with entertainment, with all these things that condition us to be saddened when we don't have that show on demand or that video, we can't, whatever it is, or it is conditioning us to have that temperament, which is soft.
Yeah. Let's dive in. Let's dive into this first one here that I want to talk about. and then we're also going to talk about how we can overcome these, right? Like, we're going to make sure that we're addressing this, but knowledge in and of itself isn't sufficient to actually make change. And I can attest to that. Like, I know something, but I still don't do it. And so we have to use the right tools and put the right plans in place to move forward. And so the first one that we're going to talk about here is not going to come as a surprise, but it is one that we've talked about before, and it's going to be lust. And that one is overwhelming today. And it is, it's an understatement, right? And and so all three of these that we're going to talk about are actually deadly sins. And I want to voice that because while they might not be the deadliest sin, they still make the list of deadly sins. And so lust here.
So, just
please.
right. Why are they deadly?
Yeah, they're deadly because they end up bringing us into the state of mortal sin, where we now completely deny and remove ourselves from God, and we start to choose ourselves 100% over God and over others, right?
Yeah.
And so, please.
So there's an objection, like some people say, well, I love God, or I believe in God. And so, how could it be a mortal sin, like a sin unto death of my soul, et cetera, et cetera? You just said it. It's because you have made yourself your own God, because you're making the decisions for yourself rather than God's will. And basically, when you do that, you separate yourself from him. It doesn't mean that God can't be active in your life. It doesn't mean that God isn't knocking on your door, beating on your door, begging you to open that door up. It just means that you are ignoring that call to do his will. And so it is mortal. It's unto death because you made the decision, not thy will, but my will be done.
That's right. Exactly. And it's so dangerous. And it sneaks in, right? Like Satan doesn't just, he would if he could, but he knows that it's more effective to just allow this gnawing to happen and to occur, and to have this downfall of your attention, your heart, your mind, all of those things to happen gradually, over time. And that's what happens with lust, right? So I think when I'm thinking about lust, and the angle that I want to take here is the parts to the whole. But when I think about lust, it's a great good that we have. Let me finish the sentence. I realized the way I approached that. That sexual attraction, that we have sexual attraction, is a great good. Lust is not a great good. Sexual attraction is a great good. Yeah. Word choice, John. And so it's a great good, and it's something that is beautiful and is of God. But when you're going through puberty, if you don't have a father that's guiding you through that, if you don't have a role model and an example that's helping you understand these things, what do? You just get caught up in your passions. And then maybe you hear the knowledge that things like pornography, masturbation are mortally sinful. And then, but you don't know how to break that habit. You've already fallen into it, and you don't understand why. And this is the situation that the majority of men have found themselves in. And this is what needs to break. So with lust here, the thing is that the angle I want to take is that it reduces an individual, a person, to their parts. It doesn't treat them in their whole. So if you're lusting after a woman, you are reducing her to some physical parts. If you're addicted to pornography, that pornographic image is probably doctored up in some sort of way via AI or with Photoshop. It's been that for years. So now you're lusting after a mildly fictitious woman. Certainly nobody in your life. And what happens is this bleeds over to other aspects of our lives. We start to see our friends. We start to see our colleagues as parts, not as whole. This goes into your wife if you have a wife. It goes into your children. And then what happens is it's all about them filling your greed. It's all about them feeling you getting instead of giving, right? It's all about you getting from people instead of giving and dying of yourself selflessly to give to them. And so, before we solve all this and before we go into how to correct this, Devin, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think there's a framework at hand that could really help us, is that there are two kinds of, let me just put it this way. A while back, years ago, when I went to confession, I realized that there was something I really needed to confess. And it was this, that I think too little of myself. Therefore, I'm not humble. and therefore, or I think too highly of myself, and I'm prideful. Either way, I'm prideful. It's a false type of humility on the other side. So this is important, I think, because the man who thinks less of himself, he has a deficiency. And that deficiency leads to like an envy. I want what other people have. I desire to be filled. And so envy is a sadness at another person's good. So I long to be filled with what they have. So then that leads to lust. I want it. I want to apprehend it some way, shape, or form. Even if it is using pornography, even if it is pridefully, or greed. I want more of money. I want more of this, more of achievement and success. And gluttony. I just got to fill my appetites. So you're filling. So you want to be filled. That's envy. Then you're filling with greed, gluttony, and lust. And then you feel like a failure because you're so full and tired by means of all this stuff that you're slothful. You give up.
Yes.
Though that's the trajectory here. And it works with the guy who thinks too highly of himself too, because he's excessively prideful. And so that lures him to vainglory. It's the opposite direction in a sense, but leads to the same conclusion. Because he has vainglory, he desires to have more of that. He wants more achievement, more people honoring him and glorifying him. And so when he desires to have more, desires to be filled, then he becomes greedy. He dominates and he overworks with Joseph Pieper. My friend of mine told me this. Joseph Pieper's quoting commenting on St. Thomas Aquinas, says, actually overwork is a form of sloth. Okay? Because why? Because it's a distraction from the true good. And so we overwork to avoid the difficult, arduous work in obtaining the true good. So this is what I'm seeing, is it all comes down from either thinking too highly of oneself or too little of oneself.
Awesome, Devin. I really love this. I like this framework. I want to actually go back to the beginning, and I want to hear just more clarifying points, right? Because we think of ourselves, the humble man is the man who thinks less of himself, right? And clarify that for us, because I know that this has come up, but we have this misunderstanding of humility. But I think you're spot on when it comes to the fact that both and how we are using the extremes to end up falling into all of these addictions, all of these bad habits from lust and gluttony and envy, and then going to that comparison, and then basically, just giving up, or just falling into laziness, falling into sloth, because it's been our way for so long and it's been so arduous and we have struggled with it that now who cares about spending our time focusing on the good and focusing on righteousness. So going back to the beginning there, offer some more clarity on humility.
Yeah. So you said something about humility, thinking less of oneself. And I love what C.S. Lewis, I think he said something like, humility is not thinking less of oneself, but thinking of oneself less. So self-preoccupation is the name of the game here. It's if we are self-preoccupied, we're literally making ourselves our own God. And I think that this is very interesting, that forgetfulness of self is the first step to remembering God. So that's humility, And so what is humility? Humility, number one, St. Thomas Aquinas, I believe, talks about it being total self-awareness. Mary exemplifies this beautifully. She knows who she is. Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord, the bond servant. Okay, so she's super lowly in her estimation compared to God. That's an important point. She's comparing herself to God, relationship to God. Behold, I'm the handservant of the Lord. All generations shall call me blessed. I magnify the Lord my God. There's a both and. She recognizes in relationship to God, as St. Louis de Montfort would say, she's like an atom. She's even smaller than an atom. Although in her mission with God working through her, she magnifies him. All generations will call her blessed. This is humility. It's total self-awareness, which leads to total self-acceptance of ourselves right where we're at. In our limitedness, in our weaknesses, but we don't get down on them. We don't belabor them and then fall into the trap of thinking of ourselves less. No, in our limitedness, we lean on the unlimited one. I love what this young man said to me the other day. He said that basically healing from wounds and healing from our interior insecurity and things like that is not just being made whole where I'm fully confident and I don't ever have a problem again with fearing situations not adding up. No, it's when you can be secure in your insecurity. secure in the Lord in your insecurity, knowing that he will take care of you. That's the healing. So what we have here is it begins with a proper understanding of who you are. Your identity leads to your destiny. Who you are determines who you'll become. That's why what you were saying with lust is so important, because your interior life gives your exterior life form. Who you are on the inside comes out on the outside. So if I don't love who I am, who God has made me be, I have not accepted myself, then I'm going to struggle for the rest of my life in overcoming these habitual addictions as you're speaking to right here of lust, gluttony, and greed, and then also, what was the other one?
Laziness or sloth is what we're going to go to.
Sloth.
But we did talk about envy.
But it all begins with vainglory.
It sure
does. It all begins with vainglory.
This is really good. I'm thinking we have to reframe, as it says in Romans 8, right? We have to put on the mind of Christ, renew our mind, right? That is what we have to do. We have to get to the root, or else we just move from one addiction to the next, right? And you said something before. What is the movement from one addiction to the next is just basically still filling this need for getting things, this need for power, this need for control that we have, this choosing of our will over God's will just continues in cycles. And if we maybe white knuckle our way through avoiding lust, we fall into gluttony, we fall into work, we fall into something along those, in those other areas of life that are going to fill that void, because that void can only be filled by God. That void can only be filled by framing ourselves and our identity as sons of the loving Father and moving forward like this.
Yeah, right there. You nailed it. We're trying to be filled, but with the wrong things. Because the guy we want glory, but then but we don't understand glory, because St. Thomas Aquinas says that, so glory becomes vainglory in three ways. So what is glory? Glory, in a sense, is magnanimity. It's when I have this large-heartedness to do the good and to live virtuously, but not for the sake of the reward, even though I'm rewarded, but for the sake of good itself, for the sake of God and his goodness. So we should desire glory because God's going to glorify us as we glorify him. That's just his plan. But what we do is we turn it into vainglory. And St. Thomas says there's three ways in which we can turn glory into vainglory. First, we find glory in perishable things. So your car, your house, your status, whatever, those are perishable things that men find glory in. Okay. The second one is from people who are unstable, who really aren't really glorified. So they're not saints, and we're seeking glory from men. And then the third one is when we do something that's glorifying God, but really we're glorifying ourselves. Mm-hmm. So those are the three ways we transform glory into vainglory, but it's from vainglory that we're trying to be filled. That's envy. I'm sad at another person's, greatness or success. I want to be filled with that. So I grasp for that through greed, lust, gluttony. I'm trying to fill myself. Then I become too full through the gluttony, through the greed. And then I'm too full. That's sloth. Yeah. Then I don't want to act.
Exactly. And so let's go to talking about overcoming. If you framed our minds correctly, right? If you framed your mind correctly, let's talk about what are some tactics, what are some ways that men can overcome these lustful temptations before we move on to the second point, which is gluttony, that we've already been bringing up here. And I really love talking about gluttony. And so well, let me just start here. One of the ways that I have heard and that I've seen help men is this IDS, right? Where you identify, you discuss with yourself, and then you solve, right? And it's this idea of figuring out where these habits are coming from and where they're tied to, right? Yes, we have to get to the root. We have to get to that fear. We have to get that fear of want and all those things that we're talking about. But here we are now. We've had that, but this addiction has set on. And so overcoming that, I think when I'm looking at identifying, we have to identify these habits that put ourselves in these situations to directly and instantly lust after women. This is the easiest fix, right? Is it at evening when you're doom scrolling on your phone? Get rid of that. Go to a dumb phone, right? Like do something radical. Definitely about the idea of having accountability for men. But once we're discussing, before we solve, once we discuss within ourselves, we have to realize that these are the situations, and we have to then think through, what can I do to avoid these things? Generally speaking, not looking at every billboard or every woman that walks by, right? Like, is that a situation where you're prone to lust, as they say, undressing her with your eyes? Like, if that's the case, you need to like learn to practice custody of the eyes. In fact, you should practice that nonstop, not just now, but forever, right? We should always learn to control our gaze so that we can control our imagination, so that God can better fill and better live within us. But then finally, we get to that solving part of it: custody of the eyes, fasting, which I'm going to bring up more of, daily prayers, like these sort of things, accountability partners, ways to solve it. So that is just a tentative framework. If you are looking for further, there's some great resources out there. But Devin, I'd love to hear from you. Just this addiction has set in. I now realize the truth of all of this, which that really does help. But now how do I overcome this?
Yeah. So this is fundamentally how we approach sin in our lives and addiction, is that we treat it like, I've heard Jake Kim talk about this, but basically you've got a weed that's growing in your backyard and you hate that weed. And so what you go out, you take your scissors or whatever you do, you take your shovel and you clip it off. And then 2 days later, that weed is back thicker and stronger than it was before. And in fact, there might be a couple more, because what we do with sin is we go to confession or we confess to God and I'm sorry, Lord, and we're cutting it off at the surface, but yet the root of it still exists. I think when we're approaching lust or any of these, we have to find out why, what is the root? Where is it coming from? Why, this is me. Okay. So
Please.
I notice that lust. I notice that I'm more prone to lust when I'm prideful. When I feel good about myself, I'm more prone, or I've done something good achievement and I'm patting myself on the back. I kind of become this internal aggressor, like this wolf. Like, I think I should have more. I deserve it. But there's also another side of this. Why do we turn to comfort? Sometimes it's because we feel like we're so weak and we need to fill ourselves with something to make ourselves feel better. And I think fundamentally that's really what's going on with most of us, is that we're so beat up. Maybe even we beat up ourselves. Maybe we feel like we're not hitting it at work, or we're not succeeding in the world. And we tend to do all this measuring. So the world is like this big mirror, and I look at my neighbor and he's got the new truck. I look at my friends, they got the new house. It's like this mirror that reflects back to me. You don't have what it takes. You're not measuring up. And so what do? I need to seek comfort. I need to, nurse somehow, some way. So I booze it up. So I binge watch. So I, do drugs.
Yep.
So I lust and I use pornography, whatever it is. I think we have to get to the root to why I do it. And we think it's going to make, and this is a mistake. This is a tragic error. We think it's going to make ourselves feel better and console us. But after we're done, it leaves us in more pain and agony and shame than before. And this is very important, because dealing specifically with lust, what is it that every man wants to be? He wants to be a real man. Lust divorces love from sacrifice, and sacrifice is the essence of a man. A man is made for sacrifice, and sacrifice is made for the man. And in fact, when you suffer, you take that suffering. All men suffer, few men sacrifice. So what are we called to do? We're called to take the suffering in our lives, offer it up as a sacrifice to God. And what happens? That pain that you feel is selfishness leaving the soul. Mm-hmm. That's how you become a man.
Love it. Yeah. Selfishness leaving the soul. Praise be to God. Let's all pursue that. And so I want to actually move to the next one here. I want to move to gluttony, because I think that this is one that men don't realize the effects of gluttony. And I know I didn't. And I'm going to just lead right here by stating, guess what? Gluttony is not just eating too much. It is eating hastily. It's eating too fast, right? Thomas Aquinas talks about 5 different ways that gluttony affects the lives of men. And I actually wrote them all down here. And
wasn't one like delicate?
Daintily, yes, exactly.
So my gosh.
There's 5 ways. And so this was actually really good for me just a few years ago. I am a man that treats far too often everything in life as some sort of resource and some sort of utility purpose, including food. Never mind the fact that God gave us taste. He gave us smell. there is something at its heart so beautiful, and the fact that God chose to endow us with these abilities, these characteristics. So we need to see the beauty in that. But I wasn't, and I wasn't necessarily overeating. And so I never thought I was a glutton. And then darn it, Peter Kraft read through gluttony, and he goes through these 5 things that Thomas Aquinas brings up. And the first one is hastily, right? That's too fast. That's just eating food as if it has a purpose. You're ignoring what you're eating. You're ignoring what you're smelling. You're ignoring the people that you're around, because it's about getting from point A to point B so that you can do something else that you would prefer to be doing, or something along those lines. It's also eating sumptuously, which is demanding rich food, right? It's demanding only the best. And we can see that in our society, right? We'll get there. We live in this throwaway culture here, but it's demanding these rich foods. It's greedily. That's the third one. It's picky eating, right?
What'd you say?
Greedily.
Greedily.
So greedily is what is translated in the translation I have, and that's picky eating, right? And so that's this idea. It has to be this food and only this type of food, and only with this sort of corresponding foods, etc. It's that picky eating. Who is a picky eater? Children are picky eaters, right? And
adult children.
And adult children, exactly. And boy, does our society want you to be a picky eater. You love Taco Bell, you go to Taco Bell. You love, Wendy's, great.
We've made a profession out of being foodies, which just means that you're picky. Just
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. The last two, daintily is the one that you've already brought up, and that has to be perfectly prepared. And then excessively, which is just too much. So yes, the good old boy in Tennessee can be as much of, or I guess is a glutton, could be a glutton, as well as the 80-year-old woman who's very wealthy living in New York City, right? I mean, it can affect the 8-year-old to the 80-year-old. It affects all of us. Wow. And we have to be on guard against this, because God gave us the good, which is our ability to taste, which is our ability to spend time and leisure around food, right? You think about scripture and the banquet feast and all of this sort of stuff, right? There's something in its very heart and very its essence that resonates and that speaks to man as we should be living and as we should be encountering people and food in our lives. And so to go further, the scholastics such as Thomas Aquinas and these said that there are these medieval, maidens of gluttony, right? And so this is that byproduct, this is that ripple effect. And he brings it down and he talks about just general intemperance, these 5 daughters of gluttony, these 5 maidens of gluttony. And I'm just going to bring up a couple of them, but it's foolish talk and behavior. Your inability to control yourself when you're eating can bleed over to your inability to control yourself when you're talking and when you're acting. Immoderate speech is the next one, right? Lacking that control in cuss words and things of that. Oh, man. Dullness of mind. And this is the one that really got to my heart, thanks to you, Devin, was as fathers, when we go home and we eat too much or maybe even eat too fast, which can cause the same effect, and we are dull in our mind, we cannot give ourselves to our wives who are in desperate need of our attention, to our children who desperately need and want our attention. And I want to give them that. And so watching how fast and how much you're eating at dinner is essential to being a good father for others, to dying to self and living for others, to getting less so that you can give more of yourself to them, right? And that's at the heart of it. So I know I talked a lot about this, and maybe it's a little bit much. You're going to have to rewind and listen through all those things and reflect on them in your lives. But I framing it all, right? It's all about that envy. And so we want to get more. We want to get it a certain way. We want to do this and not that. So we're going to get this done faster, including, eating. So Devin, on gluttony.
Yeah, I think the bottom line to the sin of gluttony is that it removes our hunger for the greater good. So we fill ourselves up with the lesser goods so that we no longer hunger for the greater good. And I've discovered this myself. I mean, I remember when I discovered Gregory talking about this in Aquinas' Summa. Man, it was so painful, where Gregory said, all that he has done valiant, if you commit the sin of gluttony, and that is all those 5 ways you discussed, you have all that a man has done valiantly, he has forfeited. He says all his virtue has come to naught. That's scary, man. I remember going to confession, and I was confessing this like gluttony, and the priest kind of laughed at me because I don't look like I'm a gluttonous person. Like, like physically, you would be like, come on. He started laughing at me a little bit. And he's like, and then he was like, so why do you think you commit a sin of gluttony? And I explained, well, I binge on this and I drink on this. And then I quoted Gregory to him, and he was like, oh yes, you are losing all that you fought for.
Wow.
You are losing all you fought for. So, and Gregory says this, he says, unless we tame the enemy dwelling within us, namely our gluttonous appetite, we have not even stood up to engage in the spiritual battle. So where lust divorces us from manhood, meaning sacrifice, and that I'm telling you, when we sacrifice, we have the most freedom because we're detaching ourselves from all these things that are holding us back. But with gluttony, when we're filling ourselves with all these things that are lesser good, then we don't have any room for God to dwell in us. Then we become lifeless. And I think that's what really, so then we're no longer going to engage in the spiritual combat because we don't feel like men. If you want to feel like a man, this is what really convicted me. If I want to really feel like a man, if I really want to be a man, lust and gluttony, they got to go away. I tell you what, I'm so ashamed of myself and I feel so terrible after I commit these sins, right? Yes. And finally I got to the point was like, so like I wanted that extra drink, and I had to tell myself, I had to have this conversation with myself. If you, Devin, have that drink, you will feel awful afterwards, probably the next morning. You will not get up at the same time tomorrow morning. You will ruin your day tomorrow. But not only that, you'll feel shame and misery. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I told myself that enough. I'm like, I'm not doing it. Yeah. And it was like, finally, I broke free from the addiction of drinking, all the time. And I was free.
Yeah. This is exactly what men and what us men need to be talking about more of, because the connections between all of these become more and more apparent after you've broken free and after you start living this virtuous life. We have Gregory the Great, as you brought up, and in that same area in the Summa, he talks about how gluttony provides the bodily matter for lust, right? There's this interconnection between it all. And I think it took me a while to wrestle with that and to actually realize the unification of both of them. Mm-hmm. And I want to actually just tell this because last year, we'll just jump to there. How do we solve gluttony? Well, it's fasting and abstinence, and it's not dieting, right? We don't solve gluttony.
I think actually, yes, it is fasting and abstinence, but that even fasting and abstinence in itself is not good.
Fully
really.
Sufficient.
It's not sufficient. There you go. Why are we fasting?
Yes.
Why? What?
Absolutely.
The key is our motive has to be, I want more of you, God.
Amen.
I want more of you living in me. You are the great good that I desire. If we don't have that desire, none of this is going to work. If men don't desire God, and this is a problem with us men.
Yes.
Because I want to be a warrior, but a warrior fights for that which he loves. So a warrior has to love. If the warrior does not love, then it's basically a lover without fight is a weakling. A fighter without love is a bully. Mm-hmm. So we have to learn to be loved, to love. That means, in a sense, we become the receiver of God's love. That's right. Then we can become a lover who fights, who becomes a warrior. The problem with men is that we are fearful of becoming that receiver of love, or we become too effeminate, but we're afraid to become that receiver of love. And therefore we don't desire God at that level. We don't desire him with this, I love you, I desire you, I want you in me. And therefore we never become the real men that God is a mighty warrior. He's a fighter. I never become that fighter and that warrior because I'm not allowing myself to be loved.
Yeah, thank you. It can be easy to miss that and to just become white knuckle stoics, and that was me for many years when it came to fasting. So I appreciate that clarity because we do it so as to purify our prayer, right? As St. John Climacus stated, fasting is for purity of prayer, right? What is prayer? Prayer is that conversation with our beloved, that conversation with Christ. We fast so as to unite ourselves more perfectly and more fully and more intimately and more deeply and more routinely to our Savior, and that we can't emphasize that enough. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. To full circle here, going back to this connection between gluttony and lust, is what I've already been stating. Is it's this notion of getting instead of giving. And so if it's all about getting, and we're just all about getting this type of food this way and this amount of food and this type of, and going to, McDonald's 5 days a week because you don't care about your temple, you don't care about yourself. We start just seeing everything and everyone around us as somebody who is here to satisfy our pleasures, to satisfy that which makes us feel good in the moment. And so then that getting habit bleeds over into lust, or as Gregory states, gives us the bodily matter for lust. And so I appreciate that. I do. Let's jump on to laziness. Let's jump on and distinctions here. But yeah, before we do that, go for it.
Well, I just, with sloth, laziness, this is the ultimate outcome of all of it.
Yes.
So you run from vainglory of wanting to be great for yourself to envy or jealousy. And then you move into these areas of gluttony, lust, and greed to fill yourselves up. And then you're too full. You're too full on the world. And then this is the ultimate outcome right here. And so It'd be good to define what sloth is. And
so, Devin, thank you. I think that's exactly a great starting point, is that we have to define laziness and sloth, the correlation and differences between them. And so laziness is just not using the time that God has given you for good. And I'm not talking about leisure. I'm not talking about rest, which are needed. It's a moderate of both of those, right? It's falling into the me time, that just extends beyond, to the degree where you are irresponsible and you're foolish because you're not actually working on the important tasks entrusted to you, or in the important tasks that you are responsible for. This continuation, day in and day out, turns into a complete lethargy. And this is the sin of our times, right? This is the sin of our world and our society, is sloth, or sloth, turns us away from the goods of God, that turns us away from the treasures that we are called to be storing up in heaven. And we start not even seeing that as a worthwhile pursuit in our own lives. And when we become so negligent, when we become so removed from actual practicing, we have fallen into the mortal sin of sloth, where it is constantly, as we've already stated, my way be done, not yours. And so this fall is something that, all the way from the whole journey that we've just been talking about here, kind of just builds up into this lethargy of laziness of life, this sloth of life. So that's what I'd like to say here at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, again, my friend Joe Hebert, who's a Thomist, he quoting St. Thomas, I believe, he's like, sloth or sloth is sadness in the face of divine good. So basically, as opposed to the joy that we should take in it. So sloth is a vice contrary to charity. So if you're looking at it in means of Thomistic theology, deficiency and excess and defect, charity is the goal. It's to love God. It's to glorify God. But when I'm sad because I got to do anything for God, I just, oh my gosh, I actually have to pray, or I actually have to serve someone, or whatever it is. I mean, it could be anything. Like for me, sometimes it's like God may be calling me to write something, and I'm like, oh man, it's like, it's this sadness in the face of doing the good. And it's so amazing with the ultimate outcome of sloth.
Sadness. Yeah.
This is what we have to be so aware of. What's the ultimate outcome of sloth? You literally block future opportunities to work with God and have his grace flow through you, because if you see this perfectly in the parable of the talents. You've got that wicked, lazy servant who was slothful. He buried his talent. He was saddened by doing the good for the good. And what happens? God cuts off the master who represents God cuts off all future opportunities. But to the other two who weren't saddened by trying to do the good, who actually saw it as kind of like, okay, this is a challenge. I'm going to risk. I trust my master. I'm going to go for it. They're rewarded with greater responsibilities. I find this time and time again is when I'm like, oh, I guess I could write that article, but I'm not sure. And I write it. And then somebody calls me and says, hey, we want to interview you on that subject.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's a great interview. And then pretty soon I'm writing a book on it. It's like, oh, all those opportunities came from just that little thing because I was responsible. Yes. He who is faithful in small matters will be granted greater responsibilities. He who is not faithful in small matters will be granted no responsibility.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate outcome of sloth.
Yeah, exactly. And so overcoming this is, I find it easier, and I'd love to, obviously we need to be going to prayer and doing prayer, and we need to be doing these sort of things. But laziness is something that's a little bit easier to quickly and easily identify. And in those situations where we are doom scrolling, those situations where you are sitting in bed with the TV on, those situations where you have to get your TV time in every single day, where you have to have your nightcap, your drink every single day, all of these things, so interconnected. And so once we've identified those things and those situations and those occurrences that just constantly lead us to this, then we can plan, and then we can actually take action in that plan. I do say that another thing is that we also, I think laziness is a part of it, is that we are afraid of getting things right. We are afraid of getting things, all the stuff done that we have to do. I've heard friends say, I'm so overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that I do that I just curl up and I just watch TV, like it's like just deadening to the responsibilities of lives. And so that fear that is within us, comes out in the form of avoidance, in the form of laziness. And so we have to identify that as well. I heard individuals say, shortcuts lead to short successes. And that's the truth. This takes work, right? There's not something that's just like an easy out or an easy shortcut to course correct and to work on virtues and to work. There's never a point, I've said it before, that we reach the pinnacle of X virtue in this life, right? There's always more that we can be doing, and that's the beauty of it. So I just wanted to talk briefly about overcoming laziness.
Well, and there's another side to this too, as my friend also points out, that according to Thomas Aquinas and others, that overworking, being a workaholic, is actually sloth, because the reason is you're distracting yourself from desiring and wanting the good, what God is calling you to do. How many times are you called to prayer, but you're like, no, I just got to get this done. Got to get this done. This is more important, this temporal thing. We do this all the time. It's like God is calling us to do something for him, to pray to him, to spend time with him, to serve someone in his name. And we're like, no, I have to work. I'm going to put in the extra 5 hours here. I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to give myself a break. And this is one of the big sins of our age, is this workaholism. And because it's like, I'm going to make a name for myself. I'm going to make a Shem, that's the Old Testament, the Tower of Babel thing. We're going to make a Shem for ourselves, a tower in the sky, where we don't even need God. Man.
I agree. I think that this is the principal sin of our times, is sloth and overworking. Yeah, we're so important. Everybody needs us. We need to take on more. We need to do more. Is literally just a cycle with no end and with no reward, and just constant misery and frustration. We have to break ourselves from that, men. And so, Devin, this was such a great conversation. I am so grateful that we were able to go through all this, that we were able to actually come up with a new framework. Congrats. Thank you, Devin. That was really great. So excellent. So this is the part of the episode that I like talking about, is that challenge. It's that putting on the new man, this is your challenge this week. And so what I want you to do is I want you to go through those 3 things that we just talked about. We talked about lust, we talked about gluttony, and we talked about laziness. I want you to identify one of them, and I want you to first reframe. And so, Devin, why don't you help us again with that reframing, that full structure, right? Because to solve any of these things, we got to get to that root.
Yeah,
and if we don't get this right, we're just going to go from one addiction to the next. We're going to find another one.
So we need to have self-awareness and self-acceptance. And so we need to figure out, do I think too little of myself or do I think too much of myself? And if I think too much of myself, then I'm, obviously going to pursue some form of vainglory, or so there's that excess and defect. So basically just what am I trying to fill myself up with to fill myself up with what I don't have? Okay. So that's the whole thing. God is the one we need to fill ourselves up with, but what am I turning to? Lust, right? Gluttony, greed. And then how does that lead to my sloth? So I think it's fundamental for us to figure out which kind of these 2 people are we. Do I think too little of myself? Do I think too highly of myself? Am I pursuing vainglory? Am I just giving up on the pursuit of being magnanimous? And then what am I filling myself up with rather than filling myself up with God? Identify those things and then tackle sloth, man.
Yeah. What a good conversation. I needed this, and I'm so grateful for all of our listeners being here. We love to answer your questions. We love to answer them on the show. So if you have show ideas, if you have questions that you want us to answer on the show, we'll even play them for you here on the show. Send those to us at podcast@catholicgentleman.com. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe. Share this with any of your friends that you feel need to hear this. This really does help. It's the primary way that we grow. So thanks for joining us. And Devin, as we end each of our episodes,
be a man. Be a saint.